I never thought a simple question could turn an ordinary night into one I'd replay in my head for weeks. It started with him asking if I was ever curious. Just a casual, hey, have you ever wondered about something kind of question. But what came next? Well, that's where things got interesting. Because he told me to take my pants off. Yeah, I know. Sounds wild. But let me back up and explain how we even got there. So I was at this little dive bar downtown, the kind of place where the lights are always a bit too dim and the jukebox spins classic rock all night. I had just gotten off work, feeling that usual mix of tired and needing to unwind, you know? My friends were out of town, so I was flying solo. I grabbed a stool at the bar, ordered a beer, and just watched the usual crowd. Some regulars chatting, a couple making out in the corner, bartenders busy with their own rhythm. That's when he walked in. Not in a flashy way, but just there. Something about the way he moved felt calm yet confident. Dark hair, eyes that looked like they'd seen a few things but were still curious about the world. He ordered a whiskey neat, then glanced around until his eyes landed on the empty seat next to me. Without hesitation, he slid in. "Hey," he said, voice low but with a friendly edge. "You come here often?" I laughed because, honestly, how cliché was that line? First time, we started talking, and everything just clicked. His name was Jamie, and unlike the usual bar chatter, he actually listened. Not just that, he asked questions, made me think about things I usually brushed off. We talked about music, jobs, weird family stuff, and somehow the conversation didn't die for hours. Hours passed, the bar got emptier, and the vibe shifted. That's when he asked me if I was ever curious. At first, I wasn't sure what he meant. Curious about what? Life? People? Myself? Then, he leaned in a little more, eyes locked on mine, and said, "Curious about me, about you, about what this could be." I felt that familiar flutter, half excitement, half nerves. I wasn't some expert in this kind of thing, but with Jamie, it felt natural to explore that curiosity. And then, out of nowhere, he said, "Take your pants off." I froze. Not because I was freaked out, but because everything about the night had changed in a fraction of a second. I looked at him, waiting to see if he was joking, but his expression was serious, genuine. That's where I left off, with my heart pounding and pants still on, wondering what the hell I was about to get myself into. I couldn't help but chuckle nervously, because it sounded so absurd coming from a guy I just met a couple hours ago in a bar. "You're serious?" I asked, half expecting him to burst out laughing. He shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, but his eyes stayed steady on me. "Yeah, I'm serious, but let me explain before you freak out." I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. "Okay, you've got my attention." "Go on." Jamie leaned back, signaling the bartender for another drink before turning back to me. "See, I don't do casual sleep-togethers. Not really. I'm pretty selective about who I let in, and more than that, I want something real. But I also want honesty and vulnerability. That's why I asked if you're ever curious. Because if you are, then maybe you're ready to try something different." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't the usual fast-paced, swipe-right kind of encounter. This felt intentional. "So, the pants thing?" I asked. He laughed softly. "It's symbolic. Like dropping your defenses, literally and figuratively. If you're comfortable enough to do that, then maybe we can move forward without walls." I looked down at my lap, then back at him. Part of me wanted to dive in head first, but another part was cautious. "I don't know, man. This is new territory for me." Jamie reached out and placed his hand lightly on mine. "Hey, no pressure, only if you want to. I'm not here to rush you." That simple gesture, his hand touching mine, sent a ripple through me. It was reassuring, but also electrifying in a way I didn't expect. "All right," I said after a beat, "but only if you promise we'll take it slow." He smiled, something warm and genuine. "Deal." So I took a breath and slowly slid my hands down my thighs, undoing my belt buckle, then my zipper. The bar was mostly empty now, the dim lights casting long shadows around us, but I felt like we were in our own little bubble. Jamie didn't look away. Instead, he kept his eyes on mine, steady and encouraging. Once my pants were off, I shifted on the stool, feeling a mix of vulnerability and anticipation. "See?" he said softly. "Nothing to be afraid of." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, except now my underwear is the only thing keeping me decent." He shrugged, grinning. "That's the point. The rest is up to how curious you really are." We sat like that for a moment, the silence comfortable, charged with unspoken possibilities. "Do you want to get out of here?" Jamie asked, voice low. "I was hoping you'd say that," I replied. We stepped outside, and the night air was cool against my bare legs. Jamie took my hand, fingers intertwining with mine effortlessly. We walked a few blocks to his place, a cozy-looking apartment with soft lights glowing through the windows. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and inviting. Plush couch, warm colors, a faint scent of sandalwood. Jamie made coffee while I found a spot on the couch, still feeling that strange buzz of adrenaline mixed with excitement. "Tell me more about you," he said, sitting close, but not crowding me. So I did. I told him about my job, my family, the little things that made me laugh or stressed me out. He listened like I was the only person in the world, nodding, asking questions, sharing bits of his own story. There was no hurry, no pressure, just two guys talking, slowly peeling back layers. At one point, Jamie reached out and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. "You're more than I expected," he said quietly. I smiled, feeling my heart thud in my chest. When he finally leaned in, it was gentle, like a question, not a demand. I met his lips halfway, and the world narrowed down to that moment, warm and soft. The night stretched on, and everything about Jamie made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. Curious? Hell yeah. More than that. I was ready to find out where this could go. We stayed wrapped up in that quiet closeness for a while, the kind of silence that feels less like emptiness and more like a shared secret. Jamie's fingers traced lazy patterns along my arm, and I realized how rare it was for me to feel this calm around someone new. Usually, I'd be overthinking everything. What I was supposed to say, how to act, whether this was going anywhere. But with him, it felt like I could just be. Eventually, his hand slid down to my leg, gentle but deliberate. I could feel his breath hitch just a little when he looked up at me. "Do you want to keep going?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard, the question both thrilling and terrifying. I'd never done anything like this before, being so open, so undressed, not just physically but emotionally. But something about Jamie made me trust him instantly. "Yeah," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I want to." He smiled, relieved and warm. We moved slowly, like a dance neither of us had rehearsed but somehow knew all the steps to. Every touch felt like a conversation, every glance a promise. I was surprised at how natural it all felt, how easy it was to be both vulnerable and excited at the same time. At one point we paused, just holding each other close. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, steady and real. "I'm glad you said yes," he murmured. "Me too," I admitted. "I didn't expect tonight to go like this." He chuckled. Neither did I. But sometimes the best things come out of nowhere. We talked more after that, the kind of deep, late-night conversations that only happen when you're both wide awake and completely honest. Jamie told me about growing up in a small town, how hard it was to come out to his family, and the way he'd always felt a little out of place. Listening to him, I realized how much courage it took to be himself in a world that didn't always make space for that. When I shared some of my own struggles, about feeling invisible, about never quite fitting in, I saw the way his eyes softened. "You're not invisible to me," he said. "You matter, more than you know." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so long doubting my own worth, thinking that maybe being different meant being alone. But here was Jamie, proving me wrong just by being present. Time slipped by, and dawn started to creep in through the curtains. Neither of us wanted the night to end, but the reality of morning was unavoidable. Jamie finally broke the silence. So coffee tomorrow? We can keep this curiosity going. I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in a while. Yeah, I think I'd like that. We exchanged numbers, and as I got dressed, I felt a strange mix of nerves and hope. It wasn't just about what happened tonight. It was about what might happen next. Walking out of his apartment, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. I took a deep breath and realized something. For the first time in a long time, I was curious about the future instead of scared of it. And honestly, that felt like the best kind of beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I half expected it to be a text from some random number, but no, it was Jamie. His message was simple. Coffee? 10 a.m. at that cafe down the street? I smiled, feeling a little giddy like a teenager. I quickly replied, sounds perfect. The hours between then and the meetup felt both long and exciting. I kept replaying last night's moments, wondering if I'd wake up and realize it was just a dream. But no, the memory was real, vivid in the way that suddenly makes your whole day brighter. I showed up at the cafe a few minutes early, heart doing its usual awkward dance. The place was small but cozy, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the air. Jamie was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 steaming cups of coffee and that easy smile I'd come to recognize. Morning, he greeted, standing up to give me a quick hug that felt more like a grounding force than just a casual gesture. Morning, I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. I'm glad you came up with this. I wasn't sure if I'd have the guts to ask. He laughed softly. I figured you'd surprise yourself. We fell into a rhythm right away, talking about everything and nothing, the weirdness of our jobs, the latest movies neither of us had seen but wanted to, the small annoyances of everyday life. There was a comfort in that, like we'd known each other longer than just a day. At some point, Jamie's gaze dropped to my hands wrapped around the coffee cup. You've got that look, he said quietly. I looked up, puzzled. What look? That one where you're trying to figure out if this is all real? Like you're half expecting to wake up and realize it was just a daydream. I smiled sheepishly. Yeah, I guess I am. He reached across the table and brushed his fingers over mine. It's real. I'm real. The honesty in his voice made something inside me soften. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe this wasn't just a fleeting thing, but the start of something genuine. Over the next few weeks, we slipped more and more into each other's lives. Jamie showed me his favorite hiking trails, and I took him to the little record store I used to visit as a teenager. We shared quiet nights cooking dinner together, laughing at our mutual inability to follow recipes, and lazy Sundays binge-watching old sitcoms. But it wasn't just the fun stuff, the easy stuff that made me want to keep going. It was the moments when Jamie would catch me off guard with a thoughtful question, or when he'd remember the little things I'd mentioned in passing. It was how he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, like I was the only person in the room. One evening, a couple of weeks in, we were sitting on his couch, the city lights twinkling through the window. I'd had a rough day at work, and I was feeling more vulnerable than usual. Jamie noticed immediately. He didn't ask me to explain or push me to talk. Instead, he just pulled me close, his arms a steady presence around me. I'm glad you're here, I whispered. He kissed the top of my head. Me too. That simple truth, shared in silence, felt like the foundation of something real. I was starting to realize that curiosity had opened the door, but trust and connection were what made it worth stepping through. Still, I couldn't shake this little voice in the back of my mind. What if this wasn't forever? What if I was fooling myself again? One night, I finally gathered the courage to ask Jamie directly. We were lying in bed, the city humming softly outside, when I turned to him. Jamie, I said hesitantly, do you ever wonder if this, it's going to last? He was quiet for a moment, then smiled softly. Every day. But that's part of it, isn't it? Not knowing exactly what the future holds, but choosing to be here now. His words settled something inside me. Maybe it wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it was about being brave enough to be curious and vulnerable together. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real hope. And I knew no matter what happened next, that this was a beginning I wanted to explore. The days rolled on, each one folding into the next in this weird, wonderful rhythm we were creating. Jamie and I had this easy back and forth that felt more like having a built-in best friend than anything else. We'd text all day, random memes, what's for dinner, debates, silly questions about each other's odd habits, and then meet up to escape the noise of the world. One afternoon, we ended up at this little park near his apartment. It wasn't anything special, just a patch of green with a few benches and a tired old swing set. But the way the light filtered through the leaves made everything feel softer, like the kind of perfect moment you want to bottle up and save. We were sitting side by side on a bench, watching kids chase pigeons and couples walk dogs. Jamie nudged me with his shoulder, grinning. You ever think about what you want? Like, really want in life? I thought about it for a second, then shook my head. I usually just try to get through the day without screwing up too badly. He laughed. Fair. No, I mean it. I'm not great at thinking about the future. Always figured I'd just take whatever came along. Jamie turned to face me, his expression serious for once. What if you could choose? Not just what happens to you, but what you want. That question caught me off guard. I looked away, trying to sort through the tangle of feelings it stirred. Honestly, I want to not feel so alone, like really connected to someone. But I'm scared it won't last. He reached out and took my hand, fingers weaving through mine. I get that. I'm scared too, but maybe that's part of being in something real. Taking the risk, even when it scares you. I squeezed his hand back, the warmth grounding me. Yeah, maybe. That afternoon felt like a turning point. There was still so much unknown, but I realized I didn't want to hide from it anymore. I wanted to lean into that fear, to see where it led. A few days later, Jamie invited me over for dinner. He was trying to impress me with his famous homemade pasta. Spoiler: the pasta looked nothing like the pictures in the cookbook, but it somehow tasted amazing. We laughed through the whole process, flour dusting our clothes and countertops. After dinner, we settled on the couch full and content. Jamie pulled me close and I rested my head on his shoulder. It felt like home. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you want to meet my friends?" I blinked, surprised. "Your friends?" He nodded. "Yeah, they're good people. I think you'd like them, but I get it if that feels like a big step." I thought about it. Meeting someone's friends usually meant the relationship was serious, or at least heading that way. It made my chest tighten with nerves, but also excitement. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. The night of the get-together, I was a bundle of nerves. Jamie's friends were a mixed group, funny, warm, and welcoming. They asked me questions, laughed at my jokes, and didn't treat me like an outsider. It felt like I was stepping into a new world, one that I hadn't dared to imagine before. Later, Jamie pulled me aside. "See? Not so bad, right?" I smiled. "Not bad at all." But as the night wore on, something shifted. Jamie's phone buzzed repeatedly, and he kept checking it with a furrowed brow. Finally, he excused himself to the balcony. Curious, I followed and saw him talking to someone, his voice low but tense. When he hung up, he looked over at me, eyes clouded with worry. "What's up?" I asked. He hesitated, then sighed. "It's my brother. Things aren't great at home. He's been going through some stuff, and my parents, well, let's just say they don't exactly get it." I nodded, sensing there was more, but didn't want to push. "Do you want to talk about it?" He shook his head. "Not now, but thanks for asking." That moment reminded me that no matter how close we got, everyone had their own battles. And sometimes, love wasn't about fixing those battles, but being there through them. Over the next few weeks, I saw a different side of Jamie, the side he usually kept hidden. There were phone calls in the middle of the night, moments of quiet frustration, and times when he needed space. It was hard, but I wanted to be there. I wanted to be the person who stood by him, even when things got messy. One evening, after a particularly tough day for him, We sat in his apartment, the silence heavy but comforting. He finally broke it, his voice shaky. "Thanks for sticking around. I know it's not always easy." I reached out and took his hand. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here because I want to be." He looked at me like I'd just said the most important thing in the world. "I'm glad you're curious about me, about us." I smiled. Curious and then some. And in that moment, I realized that the question he asked me at the bar, the one about being curious, wasn't just about that night. It was about choosing to open up, to risk, to hope. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. After that night, I realized I wanted to know everything about Jamie, the parts he let me see and the parts he kept locked away. It wasn't just about the easy laughs or quiet moments. It was about standing with him when things got rough, the stuff that didn't make for cute Instagram posts or casual bar talk. One Saturday, Jamie invited me to go with him to his hometown. I'd never met his family, and honestly, meeting someone's family was always this intimidating milestone for me. But Jamie's voice was steady when he asked, like he really wanted me there. "I think it's time," he said. The drive was long, winding through stretches of highway lined with trees that hadn't quite turned for fall yet. Jamie was quiet most of the way, and I figured he was probably nervous about how I'd be received. Me, the city kid with no small-town roots. When we pulled up to his parents' house, I saw immediately where some of Jamie's hesitations came from. It was one of those old-fashioned places, the kind of house where you could tell a lot of history lived in the creaky floors and faded wallpaper. His mom opened the door before we could even knock. She smiled at Jamie like she was relieved to see him, but when her eyes landed on me, I caught that subtle flicker of surprise. "Jamie," she said, voice warm but cautious. "And you must be—" "Yeah, this is Chris," Jamie said, squeezing my hand under the table later. "Mom, this is Chris." We spent the afternoon eating food Jamie's mom cooked, surrounded by photos of family gatherings and old vacations. His dad was quiet but polite, occasionally throwing in a question or two. I did my best to be myself, answering honestly when asked about my job or where I grew up. But it was the small moments that mattered. The way Jamie's mom smiled when she saw how close we were, the way Jamie's dad nodded approvingly when I complimented their old dog, Max. Later that evening, after his parents had gone to bed, Jamie and I sat on the back porch, the night cool and quiet, except for the occasional chirp of crickets. "I know tonight was a lot," Jamie said, his voice low. I nodded. "It was. But it felt real. Like I got to see where you come from." He looked at me, eyes reflecting the tiny string of porch lights. "That's important. I want you to be part of that, even if it's messy." "Messy's okay," I said. "I'm not here for perfect." He smiled, the kind that reaches his eyes and makes me feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Good. Because this, us, it's not about perfection. It's about being honest, even when it's hard. Those words stuck with me in the days that followed. I realized I was falling for him, not just for the moments that felt easy, but for the ones that challenged me to be better, braver. A week later, Jamie surprised me with tickets to a concert. It was a small venue, a local band we both liked, but hadn't seen live. The energy in the room was electric, the music pulsing through my veins. Jamie grabbed my hand in the crowd, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. After the show, we found a quiet spot outside. The city lights blurred behind us, and Jamie pulled me close. "I've been thinking about us," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I looked up at him, heart pounding. "Yeah?" He nodded. "I want to keep building this, whatever it is, but I also want to be clear that I'm serious about you." I felt this rush of warmth, like the kind you get when a cold day suddenly turns sunny. "I'm serious too," I said, more than I thought I'd be. That night, lying in bed with Jamie's arm draped over me, I realized I didn't just want to be curious anymore. I wanted to be committed, to him, to us, to whatever came next. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when the uncertainty crept in, when my old fears whispered that I was fooling myself. But Jamie's steady presence, his quiet confidence in us, kept me grounded. One evening after a long day at work, I called him, voice tired and raw. "Hey," Jamie said immediately. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then let out a breath. "Not really." Just scared, I guess. He didn't push, just listened. Want to talk about it? I told him about the doubts, the worries that maybe I wasn't enough, or that this was all too good to last. There was a pause. Then Jamie's voice, firm but gentle. You are enough, and I'm here. We're in this together. That simple reassurance meant everything. I realized that love wasn't about never feeling scared or uncertain. It was about choosing to face those things with someone by your side. As the months passed, Jamie and I grew closer in ways I hadn't imagined possible. We learned how to argue without hurting, how to celebrate the little victories, how to hold each other up when life got heavy. One night, sitting on his couch with our feet tangled together, Jamie looked at me and said, "Remember when I asked if you were curious?" I smiled. "Yeah, I was curious then. Now I'm something else." "What?" "Certain. About you. About us. I want to see where this goes." He pulled me into a kiss that felt like a promise, a beginning, and a home all at once. And honestly, I couldn't wait for all the chapters still left to write. There was this one night, not long after that conversation on the couch, when everything finally settled into place for me. Jamie and I were cooking dinner, the kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and roasted vegetables, the kind of comfortable mess that comes from two people figuring out how to live together in this new space we'd carved out. We'd been seeing each other for a while now, and the initial spark had softened into something steady. Not the kind of dull routine that makes you wonder if it's over, but a quiet kind of contentment that I never really thought I'd find. As we chopped and stirred, Jamie caught my eye and smiled that way he does, like he's holding a secret just for me. "You know," he said, "I was thinking about that first night, when I told you to take your pants off." I laughed, shaking my head. "Yeah, that was definitely not the usual way to start something." He grinned. "Nope. But it worked, right?" "It did," I said, feeling warmth spread through my chest. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. "I'm glad you were curious enough to stay." And that's when it hit me, the real reason I was here, sitting in this small kitchen with the guy who had asked me a question that changed everything. It wasn't just about curiosity or the thrill of something new. It was about trust and the courage to open up, even when it was scary. I took his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm glad I did too. We finished cooking, sat down at the tiny table, and talked late into the night about everything and nothing. The city outside hummed quietly, but inside, it felt like the whole world had narrowed down to just us. Looking back, I realized that night was less a beginning and more a continuation, a decision to keep choosing each other day after day. Love, I've learned, isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's just two people showing up, being real, and saying, without words, "I'm here, I'm with you." And honestly, that's more than enough.